Good evening, and welcome to the spring program of the 41st Greater Lafayette Holocaust Remembrance Conference. I am Sarah Cowley, Chair of the Greater Lafayette Holocaust Remembrance Committee. Our speaker tonight, Tibor Spitz, tells a doubly harrowing story of surviving the Holocaust and then of escaping the communist regime in Czechoslovakia after that. When he was 68, Mr. Spitz became a full-time artist. He has produced over 600 works in various media. His work has been widely exhibited in the United States and abroad, and we are fortunate to have him with us tonight to help us understand how vital the arts are and how important they can be in helping individuals recover from trauma, isolation, injustice. Mr. Spitz's presentation will be followed by a question and answer opportunity facilitated by Associate Professor of History at Purdue University and Director of the Human Rights Program, Dr. Rebecca Klein-Peshova. And after the presentation and for the Q&A session, Mr. Spitz will be joined by his wife, Noemi, who is also a Holocaust survivor. And now, speaking to us from his home in New York, Mr. Tibor Spitz.
Thanks for the introduction. And as title is saying, what you are going to see, the slideshow takes 3 sections of 20 minutes. All paintings, art, and sculptures you will see were made by me, and this is part of the healing process. I'm now 92. I was 15 when the war was over in 1945. Who was 10 years older, let's say 25, would be over 100 years old, and 35 old people at that time would be over 110, which means that it's not becoming a rarity to let speak somebody who was there. I was born in Czechoslovakia in 1929, and you see it on the map in the red. On the left-hand side are Czech lands, and in the middle Slovakia, and it was a piece of Ruthenia there. Czechoslovakia was a democratic country, something like America, and there were no differences between rights, human rights, legal rights of people, regardless of religion, nationality, minorities, and so on, which means that we lived there practically free from any point of view you can imagine. Our ancestors lived in Europe for hundreds of years, and they were practically 2 major religions. If I consider Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, 3 major religions, except that Jews were only about 2% of the European population. Again, there were no differences in theology or some kind of conflict. Christians believe Messiah is coming back and returning, and Jews believe that Messiah would come one day. My father accepted a job in a community of 100 families, but it was very high, in the very high mountains, 5,000 feet tall. Even if you see green grass on the field, it might be fall. In the background, it's snow on the peaks. On the left-hand side picture, it's even shown easier. It was a county seat, small town, we call it town, but there were only 2,000 people living there. On the left-hand side, you see a synagogue, on the right-hand side too. But second house from it was a Protestant church, and a little bit further a Catholic church, which means that what I'm saying is there were no real differences and conflicts between people of different religions or origins. This is a picture taken in 1936, before the Holocaust, You see my father, a reverend, a cantor of the Jewish congregation. My mother in the middle, a teacher, and my brother, 2 years older, on the top, and my younger sister on the right. I'm on the extreme left. We received our religious education mostly at home because there were not enough Jewish children to have a Jewish school, which means I went to a regular school. We were aware that we belong to a very ancient culture, thousands of years old, uninterrupted, with a lot of literature and opinions and all kinds of surviving stories, because within 4,000 years, almost 4,000 years, a lot of things happen. This is photographs from my 3 elementary classes. I only attended 5, and then I couldn't go to school for 5 years. Again, teachers treated us equally. There were about 40 to 50 kids in each class, and there were only 2 Jews, 1 girl next besides me. Jews were a very, very tiny minority. Even now, it's about 1 Jew to 640 other people. Can you imagine? 0.15% of the world population. But European Jews were about 2%, and they had extremely high literature. You're seeing that pie graph. Christians about 1/3 of the world population, Muslims about 1/5. Might have changed in the meantime. And here on the top, 0.2% is almost the same size as a line drawn in between them. The European Jews were educated, very successful, and Churchill told about the Jews, no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that Jews are beyond all questions the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. He said in the 1920s, but success of Jews insulted Hitler, and when he got into power, he decided to wipe out that competition because he believes that Germans are the master race and should be masters of all humankind, and the rest should be either slaves or vanished. And he wrote a book called Mein Kampf in 1924, published in 1925. And when he became a chancellor of Germany in 1933, he very clearly said that he would replace population of Slavic Poland and Russia first, but also Anglo-Saxons, French he called degenerated people, and all colored people would certainly be wiped out as undesirables. People didn't understand that he might try to implement it because it's also unbelievably unusual. They believed that he was bluffing and exaggerated as a politician. But he said if somebody would oppose him, not only Jews, somebody would oppose him, his plans, he would wipe out the Jews first. And when 1938 came, it became an eye-opener, and my mother started remembering the terrible book where he was very specific, and nobody really considered it as realistic. They believed there were some fantasies or some possibly threats, empty threats. In 1938, what's called Kristallnacht, because suddenly 7,000 Jewish businesses, glass was broken into, hundreds of synagogues set on fire, and 30,000 Jewish German civilians arrested and sent into a concentration camp, which means that it started showing that it was not a bluff and it was a real thing. And this happened in the whole Germany, very well synchronized and planned, and in Austria. In Czechoslovakia, which was a neighboring country next to Germany and even Austria, the government was against German aggression and really wanted to defend their country in case of some kind of a neighbor would try to attack it. And but came British Premier Chamberlain in the same year, 1938, and he talked to Hitler and believes that that Hitler wouldn't start a war if he gives him what he wanted. And he wanted those dark purple areas of Czechoslovakia where minorities, German-speaking minorities lived. When that Munich Agreement came about and he received what he wanted, he took over Bohemia and helped Slovakia, which is here in blue on the map, to be independent country. And because it was independent through Hitler's political manipulations, they became allies, very strong allies to Nazi Germany. Naturally, here you see how president of the country on the right is shaking hand with Hitler, and naturally he promised for total cooperation and help of little Slovakia to Germany. And Hitler accepted it with great pleasure because it allowed him to start slicing up Europe and prepare situation for his attacks. This is a book, Mein Kampf, and naturally it was translated in Slovak, and all ideology written in this book was accepted as facts. Naturally, Slovak Jews were trapped, and uncertainty came about. Nobody knew what and which form would take that persecution and those threats, because it all looked unreal. A Slovak version of Nuremberg laws, which are anti-Jewish laws, definition who is a Jew, made it full Jew had to have 4 Jewish grandparents, Mischling or mixed race were two Jewish grandparents and so on, which means that they accepted it and even made it more strict, more so-called Jews became so many people got into the category of becoming Jewish, and because it was just a preparing to rob those people of property, and situation has shown what to do with them later. This made us feel like this is a little like only works in English. You remember Fiddler on the Roof? And this is Fiddler on the Hoof. If fiddling sitting on the top of the roof is uncertain enough, but on a walking or galloping horse, it's much more difficult. Problem was that not everybody understood that the danger was real. You know, in this painting, I was showing a boy playing with his train, and behind him something which might kill him and eat him, you know, any moment. And this was a situation. People were educated and very nice and believed in reciprocity, as if they said, expect the lion not to eat you because you didn't eat him. No, lion would eat you anyway. But it started really showing in a very bad way demonstrations, you know, like stones started being thrown into Jewish businesses and homes and windows, and very noisy threats against, because Jews were harmless, helpless, unarmed, an extremely small minority. If 2 people are harmed in a room filled with 100 people, you know, you don't even notice. And this is what Hitler was playing with, because he could share the loot of Jewish properties and get some cooperation and sympathy. We looked like any other people on the street. Nobody could see on the street like in American street. You don't know what religions those people are, which means they had to mark us, and they did it with about 4-inch white star, which we had to wear Here it is shown on the left-hand side of outer clothing, and had to be sewn very tightly, not removable, was not removable. In Czech lands, it had a word Jude in it, and in Slovakia, it was like a text without any. This is my last class. I'm on the top here with the X. I was always the smallest in the class. We were about 50 to 60 children. And we were all treated equally. I don't remember any persecution or any comments or anything. Naturally, boys were making fun of each other, including me, and we were fighting as boys with no really any ideological backgrounds. Population naturally was prepared to wipe out the Jewish race, as they said, and they accused us of poisoning wells and causing epidemics and making human misery and poverty. We were guilty of everything, including bad weather, but nobody died, even if we so-called poisoned things, and nobody really was missing, so that we didn't kidnap children and so on. It was all propaganda, and this is what was based, the whole ideology was based on just repeating lies. We hoped that we could run away and so on, but even United States and England refused to intervene or help us. And as you see on those pictures, it looks like a sad and desperate situations. When they kicked us out of school, we had to make a school. In that small town, there were 24 kids between the age of 6 to 14. And we had to build a building. A lawyer was not allowed to practice his profession, was his office we used, and made a school, and my mother here in the middle was a teacher, and my older brother and younger sister were part of this group. And this was a class of 1940-41, which means that the following year started simply, in the following year they didn't live anymore. Population of Europe collaborated with the Nazis because they shared the loot, and they were winning on all fronts, as you see on this map. The yellow part are Nazis. The Nazi German armies already occupied East Europe, West Europe, and even they were in North Africa. This was, and there were few so-called neutral countries: Sweden, Spain, Turkey, and there were a few others, but they cooperated with the winner. They were selling the materials, fuel, metals, and things a war requires. The Slovakia in green in the middle was very tiny, and we had nowhere to run because there were thousands of miles in all directions. And even if we reached the shore, it was no way to cross the water. My mother understood the situation, that it started resembling a Hitler threat in every aspect of it. It was a German historian, Paul Hilbert, who characterized the history of Jews in this way. You may not live amongst us as Jews, which means that I stress that as Jews. If you converted or to Christianity or to Islam, depending where you lived, they wouldn't try to prevent it. Then the sentence was shortened. You may not live amongst us, which means that if you left or were kicked out or expelled or deported or whatever, then you would let you live. And the Nazis came with a last shortening of the sentence, saying, you may not live. And they came to a point where they were planning to exterminate, they call it like insects, exterminate, like annihilate, wipe out completely every person with Jewish ancestry, including one-day-old baby. This was president of Dr. Joseph Tiso. He was a priest because there were not too many people who were literate, and priests had a nice education. That's why he became president. And people believed that a priest, a representative of morality and God, would not harm children, civilians, and families. And this, unfortunately, served as a propaganda which fooled a lot of people into complacency, and they died because they believed in something which was not true, which was a deceitful idea how to get the Jews to the place where they could do it without any witnesses. We were promised to be resettled, to work in self-governed areas. It was not, here you see how orderly deportations went. First of all, they took 1,000 from Slovakia, 1,000 girls which were 16 years and over, unmarried. Then they sent the boys after them to work. And then they sent parents, siblings, and all the generation, which means that it was a very sophisticated psychologists worked out the scheme how to do it, I would say, cowardly, painlessly, and so that people would just not restrain, they would not revolt, they would be disciplined and obey the law, obey the orders, and go, I wouldn't say voluntarily, but without any major fights. Some people naturally were thinking differently, and I'm alive because my parents were thinking differently. You see it here, unsuspected Jews marching to their deaths. They have things with them to survive the trip and to accommodate in a new place and to start working and so on. And here, this was a picture taken by some Nazi. They found it in archives of a German soldier or guard. And you see people like that came to those concentration camps. This was a youth of Donny Kubin, where I was born and raised. And here are people who are older than 14, which means that they didn't go to that school, and none of them survived the war. And again, practically everybody, not practically, but everybody who was deported with parents was murdered. None of them appeared alive after the war. This is a picture of a wedding of my mother's sister. My mother is here at the extreme right, and her parents and sisters and their husbands are on this picture. Except my mother, the year later, everybody was murdered, including my mother's parents, my grandparents. Here is a picture of the same people. They were just taken to those camps and murdered, beyond comprehension. Father had 7 siblings, and they were married, and they were my cousins, my age. And I was 12, and almost all my relatives were murdered. 6 people remained alive because our grandfather came home, and his apartment was sealed with a sign that people of his apartment were deported. He was not deported, he was somewhere else. And he just took a train, removed his star, and visited us. It was many hours by train from Western Slovakia to far north. And he survived the war with us. But after the war, he only lasted few months because he was so disappointed. He was very religious, believed that God wouldn't allow anything like that happen, and it did happen. On these maps, this map explains how close we were. That blue part on the bottom is Slovakia, and Auschwitz is here, which is extremely, there might be 50 miles away, but we had to cross a border, a Polish border. And this way, this helped us to find out what was going on and run away, stay alive, and zigzag until we succeeded in being liberated. We learned about those death camps by accident. We helped some people in a jail. We got them out of the jail, and they turned to be escapees from Auschwitz. Auschwitz was one of the villages. There were thousands of villages in Poland, and it meant nothing. It didn't have any meaning or any destination or anything unusual. But they told us how those deportees come, how they take few labor, younger people who were able to live few more months by working in those factories, and the rest of them were told to be disinfected after a long trip. And remember, they put their clothes and so on, got a bar of soap, went into the shower room, and then when about 1,000 people were inside, poisonous gas killed them in about 15 minutes, and they were burned to ashes in about 2 hours, which means that I found out that I was 12 years old. I certainly would not be selected. I was small. Certainly would not be selected to work, and it was a death sentence. And we were like on a death row. Be aware of it, and we were able to, after those escapees, 3 days had to describe the situation until we understood that some factory killing people has been a real thing and not some kind of fantasy or propaganda or empty threat. We were not immediately deported because my father, as I said, was a clergyman, was a cantor, something like a rabbi in America or Canada, eventually identical, even with more duties and responsibilities. But one of them was officiating at Jewish funerals. In the meantime, if a Jew died, he would not be buried by other representative of other religions, which means they kept a person like that to the end of the year, where practically all Slovak Jews would be deported. Our mother was a designated teacher of the Jewish school, and until the last child was there, was deported. Also, she had an exempt status, and my brother and I, we were digging holes in the cemetery if somebody died, because we were not allowed to use any other labor, which means that we were so-called set aside for the later transport. It helped us naturally to survive the most critical part. It was an attempt to, because they had to match some numbers, attempt to deport us, but we found out and avoided it. Many Jews became confused and desperate, and those 2 pictures are showing it. Established in Slovakia for centuries, Jewish communities kept silently vanishing. People just in the morning were not in town anymore. During the night, one wave after the other were missing, which means that we knew what was going on, And we knew that we had three choices: either to remain passive and be killed at the deportation destination. We already knew even technology used. Second alternative was to revolt and be shot on the spot, because on the railroad station were soldiers and militiamen, and they wanted to avoid any disturbance or any delays. The third was an alternative which we have chosen. It was trying to survive against all odds and become witnesses of this crime, because they were wiping out all witnesses together with the victims. This was really, if I say against all odds, in 1942, when deportations were going on, Germans were winning in all fronts, and they were approaching already Stalingrad and Moscow, Eastern Front, and they were on the channel, throwing those rockets, PAU-1, PAU-2, into England, damaging buildings and killing people. And it looked like a helpless situation, but we never ever believed that Germans might win that war, Nazis might be there longer than a few months or years. This is a remark I speak, spoke hundreds of times already in schools, and just to make a record straight, Jesus, who was, according to Gospels, Jewish, had 4 Jewish grandparents. He would be qualified as a Jew. He would have to wear a yellow star, and he would be deported and killed just as anybody else. And these are like a reminder of anti-Semites who used the difference in religions and saying that we deserved it and things like that. This is another picture, if you see over the head of this painting of this face. It's a Psalm number 22, and the Gospel says that he, before being executed and dying on the cross, Jesus said, "God, God, why have you forsaken me?" It's a Psalm 22. And this is a reminder of some anti-Semites that they should be very careful, because it's extremely bizarre to be a Christian and hate the Jews, because they worship the whole religion is based on Judaism. Anyway, back to the situation. Nobody would guess and believe that the deportation meant a death sentence, because it was so unusual. People were saying, Stalin would say something, Roosevelt would say something, Churchill would say something, Pope would say something if hundreds of thousands or millions of people were slaughtered in a factory-style way. And nobody said anything. Much later, we found out that the New York Times on page 24 or page 16 had 4 lines about it, and in a way that you could believe it or didn't have to. And we were Slovak citizens, just a little bit different religion. Also, this was an interesting, because sometimes I get questions. Maybe I get a question about this one. There were 2 opinions. Some people, mostly very religious, insisted that whatever is happening in history is God's will and God's plan. And they said, if God wants us to sacrifice our lives, we should not resist. We should go to the concentration camps or to death camps and die for the name, holy name of God. But we had a mother who was of different opinion. She said the other way around. God gave us strength to resist evil and live. It was not God who wanted killing people, who wanted us to be dead. It was Hitler and the Slovak President Tiso who wanted to see us dead. We are going to resist and outsmart them and go on living. And we will never, ever give up, which means that this was behind our effort, our ideology, I would say, our conviction, never give up and never give up to evil people who want to harm you. If they try to rob us, we can settle that and take it. But if they want to kill you, you have the right to defend yourself. My older brother, was extremely smart. They called him even a genius. He said, we were debating it. He said Nazi patrols were at every corner. We didn't have false papers. And it was such a small town, they would recognize that anyway, which means that it was out of the question to try to pretend to be somebody else, to have papers proving that our ID would not be Jewish. We didn't know how to fly, and even if we did, front line, they would shoot us down even on a glider. We didn't know how to live underwater, how to breathe underwater. But he came to a very interesting conclusion. We could live like wild animals in the mountain forests because a lot of people in a very harsh environment survive. And he was thinking out all the details, how to build an underground shelter, how to breathe, how to get close to water, how to camouflage it, and how to simply construct it. And here are the examples of it. When the front line came closer, and a Soviet army, that time we called them Red Army, already approached Ukraine and was from one side, and from the north, Poland. The German army occupied Slovakia totally. They didn't trust anymore the Slovaks, who became very, very pragmatic and unreliable, and they were hesitating to put their lives into like all eggs into one basket. We just ran into the mountains with other refugees because they came by force, and it was a war situation, like a lot of civilians and homes were burning and so on, which means there were a lot of refugees. We removed our yellow stars and rushed with them, pretending to be bombed out refugees. And from that village where we ended up, we tried to find a suitable place to build our shelter. Somebody made an aerial photography, and luckily it was the area where we ran, which means I can even point with a red arrow the place where we have chosen to build our shelter. This was the way we did it. We found a ravine from both sides, like a steep hill. On the bottom was a small creek, like 1 to 2 feet wide, just depended on the rain or melted snow and ice. We found pieces of wood, like tree trunks, falling, trees, and we crisscrossed them. We didn't have any nails or ropes or anything, but we have a little hatchet and a trench shovel from a soldier throughout. While running away. Here it is, an oil painting. The yellow part, we just dug out that dirt with our bare hands, and really very difficult. Then we made that skeleton, which we placed inside. And this picture is showing how it was camouflaged. And naturally, when Germans took over, Gestapo, which is secret police, knew of every Jew or political person, like communists were hunting, just the same as the Jews, or Gypsies were also on the list to be wiped out, sent to Auschwitz or somewhere to be killed, which means they had every name ready, and we were missing on their list because whoever came back and whoever couldn't escape was arrested and sent to either by train or by those long marches to to the west, to German concentration camps, because Poland was already almost taken. Which means that this shows those horse riders, armed SS band and Slovak soldiers who were searching the forest for those escapees or partisans. In wintertime, it was more difficult, and the winter came very quickly. Here you see the fall, green grass, and maybe summertime, and on the peaks, snow. And when really November, December came, and January, February, it was really 1 to 2 feet of snow, and sometimes even deeper. And we were still in that forest, believing that after a few months we'll go home. They will liberate us, but it took 7 months before Slovakia was liberated. 7 months is 200 days and nights, and it's a long time to be like in a grave and to stay alive. And not only that, to remain mentally sane, because such an isolation is terrible. And we made it, all of us, alive. We were robbed in a forest, but not by Nazis, but partisans who were parachuted, Soviet partisans who were parachuted behind the enemy line to fight the Nazis, found Jews in a forest, and they lined us up to be shot, give us money, give us gold, and so on. I escaped, and when I came to bury them, they found them alive, but they were all stripped of their even upper clothing, and everything we owned. We had there, like backpacks and some blankets. Everything they took just to let us freeze, because I was a witness, actually, that they were not allowed to kill civilians, which means that they believe we would freeze or starve, or because they were shooting after me when I was escaping, patrols would go follow the sound of footsteps in snow and would find us and shoot us. Anyway, it didn't happen. And if not for a miracle that a mineral stream of hot water, like sulfur stinking water, because there were spas in the area, helped us to survive another 2 months. Many Jews, they were not, as I said, not only Jews, but people who were hiding in the forest were murdered. And this is a larger painting I made. This is a little bit different style of painting. And because trains were full or busy, and it was already, front line was already moving. Here shows, this picture painting shows a march of people on the right-hand side, a lot of dead bodies because who slowed down was shot. And at the end of it was just the same attempt to death. And that person who stands here watching it is obviously in Jewish religious garbs, and it is a cultural distinction. It was April 4. A few days ago, we celebrated our, I don't know which number of birthday. In April 4, both Noemi in Bratislava, capital city, and we in the forest were liberated in 1945 because the whole German army retreated. They couldn't defend it anymore, retreated from the whole country and retreated to the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, and then Soviet army was all over, and on each tank and cannon was written to Berlin, toward Berlin, toward Berlin, to Berlin, which means that this was our most important point in in our lives, in my life, because we survived something totally impossible. There were about 70 million dead victims of the Second World War, and we were supposed to be naturally part of it. 6 of us survived, and about 60, 70 people of our family did not. This is the Soviet soldiers on the Reichstag, on Parliament of German Parliament, putting a Soviet flag. And now came the very difficult problem, how to return to normal life. Eichmann had a list of 11 million Jews, and they managed to murder about half of it, about 6 million. Naturally, Slovak Jews, Czech Jews were on the list. People started coming from concentration camps and telling us all terrible stories. This was a person, a Romanian living in Israel, and asked me to paint a picture of her story in the concentration camp, and a sculpture on the right hand side I made from ceramic clay and fired it. We've learned about the Cyclone B, which killed people, that poisonous gas, and how that crematoria burn their bodies. Sometimes 24,000 Slovak Jews ended up in a pit in the forest. They had to dig out a pit, and then were machine gunned, and petroleum or some gasoline was just burning their bodies, and then a forest covered it, and there were thousands of places like that all over. A Ukrainian priest wrote a book about it because he started searching the country, and there were hundreds of, if not thousands, of places like this. 6 million Jews were victims. Each of them had a name and a face and life, and about 1/4 of them were children, which means that about 1.5 million children died during that time. If we held a moment of silence for every victim, it would take us 11 to 12 years. This is how we imagined they vanished in flames and smoke, and this is my carving. And here is ceramics, painting over ceramics, and faces of people I remember. Here also big paintings with faces I remember from my family. Here is how we felt, how many people felt, but we never get desperate to a level of weakening ourselves because we would not have survived it. This is a ceramic sculpture I made. Here also same subject of sadness and remembering those people terrified, driven to death, murdered in different ways. Then we try to relive that, and part of my healing was to depict those scenes from those terrible, tragic times. Even prophets would cry over the senseless slaughter. I don't know what profit they had by killing civilians, children, old people, females. Anyway, not soldiers, nothing who would resist or shoot at them. This is a prayer of Yizkor Elohim, like remember, God remembers the souls who sacrificed, who were killed in your name, because not being Jewish was a really that only crime those people committed, that they were born in a Jewish family, in a wrong family. This is a wooden carving with burned text, the same prayer. In it, here are also wood burnings. We have to restart our lives. I was 15, sick after 5 years from school, almost illiterate, and I had to come back to civilized world and restart our life. We all needed to do it, like crying over crying over the tragedy would not help us to go on living. Here are some of those ghosts of the past, remembering people, try to find out what happened. And it took about really 5 to 6 years. It was not like one car accident or one kind of misfortune or some kind of a trauma of a few moments or a few hours. It really took 5 to 6 years. On the top of it, we received neither apology or compensation, or nobody would feel sorry for us. All I received from an office where I registered as a refugee, homeless refugee, because we didn't have anything, not even clothes that belonged to us. And I got about $10, bar of soap, because we were all clay looking, and my shoes fell apart, which means they gave me a pair of shoes. And I have it in writing here on the bottom of it, is saying this person should get a pair of shoes and a bar of soap and $10 to survive maybe 1 week of food. I tried to immigrate to Palestine, but communist government took over, closed the borders, and because I got tuberculosis after the war, before I cured myself, we were locked in another, like a prison way of like concentration camp, but for political reasons. We returned naturally to musical instruments. We celebrated every breath we took. Like it was such a difference between that hole in a forest, dark and silent, and the real life around us. And life cannot be stopped or limited. We immediately started living fully. After curing myself a little, we made exams to school. 3 children returned to high school. I graduated in a few years. And because I had all straight A's, they already were sending people where they believed they should be, and all people, all graduates with the best marks had to study chemistry, because Stalin, who took over Central Europe, and Prague was the best school, which means that he took 160 of those graduates and sent us to study chemistry to get better explosives, better weapons, and eventually conquer capitalists of the West with better steel and so on. I then continued, became an engineer and a PhD in my field, and I missed those explosives because I got a little ill. I was lucky and studied ceramic engineering and became specialist in glass making as an engineer scientist, and this was my career. In Czechoslovakia, persecution of Jews continued. We believed that we would be free, but we were not free, because a lot of Jews were known as Democrats, as people who wanted peace and hated dictatorships, and simply communist system never agreed with Jewish ideology, particularly religion of equality and fairness. This was not part of the regime, which was very aggressive and extremely careful not to lose power. I was an engineer. I was left alone. I didn't have any political problems, but my father, who was a clergyman, had a problem. He went to a hospital with some trivial thing and never came out of it. He was not even 60. My brother was an artist. He became a prime target of harassment, persecution, and threats because he wanted to have freedom for artists, and naturally it was all censorship, and even Holocaust paintings or whatever were or somebody painted a little bit more modern way and not socialistic. Socialism realism was called, like if a colored photography has everything very realistic. Anything like that was not allowed to exhibit, and we could not even express ourselves or do something about remembering and commemorating our dead. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, I remember them, I loved them. My neighbors, schoolmates, I still remember them. This was my brother who probably was cowardly poisoned by some harmful radiation, and he became ill and died 33 years old in the peak of his creativity, because he did not agree with. He started a magazine, he started a little theater and a gallery for young people, but nothing like that was agreed with the political system and regime. And heartbroken father, as I mentioned, died 2 years later. But, who knows what happened to him? There was no way to find out. We found out about my brother by reading during the 1 year of a little bit more liberal communism. They called it Communism with a Human Face in 1967. And they described the way how they were killing people who were not accused of treason or hit by a truck and so on. This was a third way of doing it. I became really an outstanding engineer and PhD scientist. I published articles, scientific discoveries. I had all kinds of inventions and patents, as you see here. And this also kept me to heal a little, but it was some kind of a diversion rather than healing. 20 years under that regime, finally, Cuban industry, glass industry couldn't work for 3 years, and they decided to send their real specialists. And even if they gave me 2 years to fix their industry, they told me if I don't fix it in 6 weeks, and they ran their finger across their neck, which means that I spoke that language, I knew it, and in 6 weeks, first factory worked, and then the other ones. I don't have any pictures from my work, naturally, because I would have been arrested and considered a spy or saboteur. But there are a few pictures here, one from the beach, which were almost empty because people did not do that. After returning, after 9 months, we had to go and report to our bosses and return to Cuba to complete the assignment. It was a contract. The Cuban airplane was refueling in Canada, where we both, Noemi, we were married not even a year. We escaped from the airplane, from a waiting room where we had to go. And we were arrested by Canadian border police because we didn't have visa and we were eventually illegal intruders into the country. We asked for political asylum and received it. And we had to spend 5 years. I had to work and travel a lot. My passport was not valid, which means that I received a travel document and became a stateless refugee. And we spent 9 years in Canada, first 5 years before becoming citizens. We lived like aliens. And naturally, the West allowed me to total freedom in artistic expression and exhibit and do whatever I wanted, to study art and to produce art and to participate in publicizing it. And I took all advantage of it. Then we moved, 9 years later, after moving 4 times in Canada, we moved to the United States, where we also moved 4 times before landing in Kingston. Here, when we moved to Kingston, it was in newspapers, and 5 years after entering America or United States, we became both citizens here. Ceremony, it was in newspapers and so on. Which means that, again, my many credentials, which helped me to live. And after 30 years in glass industry, I accepted the challenge to participate in digital revolution. This was, computers were in infancy. They were clumsy, small, and it really showed some escapees from IBM that did not believe in computers, started a company. Here is a picture of it, where I worked for 14 years, invented a lot of stuff, and the product was magnetic recording head, which allowed to produce hard drives. Hard drives allowed to make computers every half a year, capacity doubled, and a digital age started. I usually apologize when I make lectures that I contributed to unfortunate staring of their children on phones and laptops instead of running around playing football. I retired at age 68 after 44 years working as an engineer, technician, and technologist and scientist. And I became a full-time artist because I lived a little longer. It happened 24 years ago. And I already, this is practically the slide which explains how art healed me, because every painting, every sculpture, every carving I made where the subject was Holocaust, my memories, everyone somehow removed that heavy weight from my shoulders and from my mind. And when I saw people's interest and they were asking me to explain, what I went through, it became really an artist, healing through art, what eventually we are talking about tonight. There were some people who believed that how a scientist uses different part of the brain, like right-hand side brain, a left-hand side brain, and an artist cannot be a scientist, and scientist cannot be an artist, things like that. And it was a reporter in New York who wrote in an article. You see my head is split in half, scientists against art, and the title is in Czech. It's in Slovak language. The science and art are two poles, two contradicting part of the same unit, because I didn't feel any problem becoming an artist from a completely different field. My first painting was a large handwritten Holocaust autobiography. We lived in Philadelphia, where I took a huge piece of paper, hard carton, and painted the face on the left-hand side and wrote my story about 40 years, story of 40 years between 1945, when we were liberated, to 1985. And when I was exhibiting it, I remember a mother reading it to about 9-year-old daughter, and she was crying, and the mother kept reading it, and I understood power of art, how easy it is to approach human emotions through art. And I started painting even more vigorously and learned a profession so well that an art historian called me this kind of style, what you see here, as a extension of Impressionists, because they died young and Cubism took over and they didn't have time to make a step in development of the art of Impressionists, which was a revolution by itself. And they, I would say, accused me or pointed at me, saying that I made that step. That's why my art became even more in demand to be shown. And if you see who among you is studying art or knows art, that it is an original style of those little dots. This is a wood carving of mysticism, which I had to study, and later on people asked me even to teach it, because in that whole, in the 200 nights and days, and the forest was too dense, and we didn't know if it was night. Or it started, all kinds of voices started coming to mind, and most people in that situation become mentally ill. We did not. I did not. The contrary, it was teaching me very important lessons, which I used, first of all, to survive, and secondly, then to be a very powerful inventor. I had an exhibition in Bratislava, Slovakia, my certified paintings in the most prestigious exhibition hall in the country, so that they appreciated that quality was there. They didn't know. They asked me for 15 paintings, and then asked me for another 15. And here are some catalogs of exhibition in Rockland County in Prague. This one was in Bratislava. In Slovakia, I had about 6 or 7 exhibitions simply. In Canada and America, many times. This was the most memorable, I would consider this one, because Nazis produced a museum of extinct race. They would have wiped out Jews to the last baby and wanted to have a museum to be proud of it. And after the war, it became a Jewish museum because they collected in it a lot of artificial, those artifacts which they stole from other museums and from people. And in that museum, I had my revenge because I was alive and I was showing Holocaust paintings. And this is one exhibited in Woodstock, painted by Jeremy Hoffeld. He's a famous artist. And it was so realistic that people believed that I sat in front of that painting. That's why somebody took a picture of me standing next to it. I made my art, made it into an art historian book, Rutgers University professor. The book is called Jewish American Artists and the Holocaust, and the book was marketed by my painting. And that's why the author sent me a note saying, you know, I put 44 paintings into the book, and they have chosen, marketing people have chosen your painting to sell. I'm letting you know, which means that we went to buy that book, and I was really surprised of my own capabilities because I still was working as an engineer. This was a book of poetry in Canada where my paintings made it as an illustration. And this is what I wanted to show you. Was 3 years ago, I was 90 years old, and in 2019, in a place where I was born, it used to be 2,000 people in that little town. We call it little town because it was county seat. And now it's 20,000 people. And they made me an exhibition of my paintings, and here is a catalog to commemorate or simply celebrate my 90th birthday, which was very nice of them. This is a magazine, very prestigious magazine, write about me. Here is a Aish.com, hiding from Nazis. It's another, you see the same painting they used to describe it. Canadians, Slovaks made a movie in Slovak language with English subtitles. It's a documentary, 42 minutes. And if you go online, type in Spitz DVD 01, you will see that movie. And it's practically simply about how we survived it, and it's a lot of pictures. I got this very prestigious reward also in Slovakia. During the COVID years, we were so busy, we didn't get the COVID that time. It was a second monography about my brother who lived in Slovakia. That book on the left is half of it in Slovak, half of it in English. And on the right-hand side is a little book we wrote with Noemi about our own way of surviving Holocaust. And I gave a lot of lectures on all kinds of subjects which are listed on the left. And here, every year, 10, 15, sometimes 20 lectures a year, for years, for decades. This one is from Drew University, also called, by the way, Art and the Holocaust, which means that it was also a similar subject I was presenting here. This is a Baruch College. This was usually, hundreds of people who listened or watched those lectures. Here is your lecture, which I am giving now here, advertised. And on the bottom is something I would suggest you did not miss. They made a song about Holocaust survivors. And one of them was about my life, beautiful music, beautiful performances. And they made a film, about 54 minutes documentary film, which will be shown on TV, PBS TV channel. In this area is number 13, April 26, in about 2.5 weeks at 8 p.m., which means that who is interested in this subject and likes music would see something unique. Naturally, the world remained a dangerous place. Genocides continued, even not only against Jews. There are all kinds of ethnic groups fighting and nations fighting. And we live in days where we even see that fight and hear about it in our daily news. This is just a reminder that anti-Semitism is a mental disease. A lot of people fight for all kinds of ideas, but just to kill people just because they were born at a certain ethnic or religious group is something we should not tolerate. A question I usually ask, could genocides and Holocaust happen again? Unfortunately, it can, and we should all fight to prevent it, and it's possible to prevent it. For both Jews and non-Jews, Holocaust remained a constant reminder, because 6 million people murdered like that was really unique historic event. We need a lot of faith, a lot of awareness, and religions sometimes help, sometimes does the opposite. And here it is showing that we have a choice to be either slaves or to be free people. And a reminder, if Jews are around, that for 4,000 years we were showing that it's very difficult to destroy us, and I would say impossible to destroy it. And this one is showing continuation, a hand with tattoo, which was also only practiced in Auschwitz, with a little baby touching the older person. This chronology of my major event in my life, which I try to say, and this is the end of the slideshow, which means that please ask a question, and I'm going to shut it down. Here, in case you have a continuous question, you can take a picture of it, contact me, and I would gladly answer any questions you have.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us this evening for the discussion at this year's 41st Annual Greater Lafayette Holocaust Remembrance Conference event. My name is Rebecca Klein-Peshova, and I'll be moderating the question and answer portion of this program. And so many questions have come in during Tibor's presentation that I'm going to start by clustering them. And first of all, by letting you know, Tibor, how many people have been expressing their thanks to you for sharing your story and appreciation that you're here this evening. And I'm glad to see you both here today. Yeah, so, and there's more, thank you for sharing your story and your art with us. And I'd like to start with questions about hiding. There were some questions that people had about your hiding experience, that often, most of these questions are about what you ate. How did you eat in hiding? Did you get sick in hiding? How did you deal with soldiers as they attempted to rob you? Did you encounter partisans? So here I'm clustering. There's a number of you who asked these, but I'll start there.
Forests are full of food. It's easier to go to a supermarket and buy, fill up your vehicle or your bags. But I was born there. I knew all the berries. Many are edible, many are poisonous. I knew the mushrooms, which were edible. We collected them not because of survival. We collected them because it was food, a natural food. In the fall, first months, September, October was not so bad, but when the snow fell, I had to dig the snow, under the snow, to get some leaves. They were tiny, like a quarter of an inch big strawberries. We ate those green leaves. It was so dangerous to leave that camouflage shelter that I was filling with like a hockey stick, curved branch. I put snow into my footsteps. If somebody saw me and shot me and would look where I came from, try to get to the shelter, they would not be able to. But this was our main food, were berries. Berries had a bush which was sticking over the 1 or 2 feet of snow in a forest. When we were really dying, my mother, dressed as a peasant, went to the village and risked her life. They sometimes, it was just an opportunity to get arrested, killed, or whatever, and she risked her life and brought a loaf of bread. But this was really when we were at the end of, when we felt, with the last drop of snow and ice which we ate to stay alive. This is a very difficult question to answer because people do not eat usually stuff they collect in the forest, and it was very high in the mountains. It was not like a fertile, sunny area. There were pine trees mostly. Partisans, we knew about partisans, but they were not as friendly as a group of Soviet partisans who were parachuted robbed us and tried to kill us. If I didn't escape, they would probably shoot us all. And when I returned to bury my family, they were alive, but without clothes and standing in snow in underwear. And everything they took, they didn't need berries. I collected in a forest, and they took it anyway just to kill us by starvation. If it is a specific question, I can answer.
Okay. So this is basically what people were asking about that experience. And then I would like to ask at this point also, because you're here too, Naomi, if you can tell us about how you survived. You were also in hiding during the war. If you can tell us a little bit about that, as much as you're willing to share.
I was too young. I don't remember. When war was over, I was 22 months old. That's why I didn't even know that I was in the war or I was hiding.
I had 14 years advantage in experiences.
Yes.
And my parents, they didn't tell us anything.
Yeah.
Even after the war, when I was 14 years old, I was told in school, they asked me, how come you are alive? And I came home and asked my parents that question, and they told me that we were supposed to be killed. But I had no idea. They didn't tell us, my parents. What I know about the war, I know it from Tibor, not from my parents.
Yeah.
But they left memoirs. Father wrote.
My father wrote memoirs, and that's why I know what happened to us. But otherwise, I don't remember anything.
They didn't tell children.
Yeah.
It was too drastic.
Yeah.
And we were too young.
Yeah. There was another question. Thank you for talking about this. And there's a question for Tibor here about what happened to your mom after the war.
Mother was a teacher. She went back to teaching while we were back to school. And she lived about 82, almost 82 years old, teaching to the last moment. She spoke many languages. She was teaching music. And people believe that, she was like teaching few generations of people who were very successful, because my mother taught them languages and they would become directors of television stations, like television, or filmmakers and important people, because of what, and they were started coming to me saying, "We are so grateful what your mother did for us." And I have dozens and dozens, or maybe even hundreds of friends, particularly in Slovakia, who thank me for successful life they had. I still have.
May I ask you another question about post-war and thinking about you? You said that when you went to Cuba, you were already married. And I wondered if, I'm going to ask this. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your wedding.
We had to escape because we had two weddings. First of all, in a communist country, we had to have only civil wedding, which means the religious weddings were invalid legally, meant nothing. But it was a period in 1967, a period of communism with a human face. The government understood that they bankrupting the economy, and they wanted to have a little more business with the West, and capitalism introduce inject a little bit for freedom, private property, and so on. Naturally, in August 1968, 500,000 Soviet soldiers took over Czechoslovakia and proven that there is no such thing as communism with human face, it's a beast face. And this triggered also reason for us to escape, because we had a Jewish wedding. It was about 400 people came to see such a curiosity. During that period of little liberal, more liberal, politically liberal area. After the Soviet army came, it was politically very tough. And we would have paid for it. That's why this was one of, I call it 10 reasons. Today somebody called from Spain asking me the same question. Can you tell me the reason why you escaped from such a wonderful country, Czechoslovakia? And I was telling him, there are about 10 reasons why I can give you in a hurry 5 or 7. It was just enough is enough. To live without freedom. People don't know what it means before losing freedom. And if you don't fight for freedom, you lose it. Because there's always somebody who wants to control you. And it doesn't matter what regime and what political or economic system it is. And we have been through quite a few of them.
Yeah, you certainly have. Yeah. I'd like to go on to those questions now about art. There's a lot of questions here asking about art, and some of them are really quite sophisticated questions.
I love them.
First there's a question about, that says art is subjective and everyone has their own interpretations of it. How do you feel when others who were not alive during the Holocaust and never experienced it relate to your artwork in different ways than you intended?
I can, in your advertising, it's a picture which is are those faces your artist put on those railroads. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I showed that picture to some people and they say, people are coming out of the factory, it's 5 p.m. Which means that you are right. People only understand what their capacity, mental capacity, their own experience, imagination would take. But I try to speak through emotions to people who are after freedom, after beauty, after some kind of a social justice. And those people who are tuned properly appreciate the message, and who is on a lower level of understanding, at least see some people doing something and would say that he has a longer nose and he has a shorter nose, or the horse cannot fly, how come the horse is flying, and so on. Which means that it is very individual, and it depends on practically experience and ability to imagine and understand.
Yeah.
And every person has a different point of view, a different way of looking at things. And that's why human race is so interesting.
I'm going to draw from a question which just came in that's related to some of these about, was making the art for you itself a religious experience? What parts of making the art do you think constituted a healing process for you? Is there any relationship between any religious component of doing the art and of healing through the art?
Genocide is not limited to one ethnic or religious group. There are genocides in Rwanda. There were genocide now. We have a war of a superpower trying to subdue a former member of that superpower, let's say Soviet Union and so on, which means that it is not I used that religious garb to characterize that this particular case of injustice or murder or genocide is related to the Jews. How would you, if I wanted to paint Rwanda, certainly that person who was standing there in my paintings would look differently and would be differently dressed, and environment would be different. Which means that, first of all, it's symbolism. Secondly, I got extremely good religious education, but not from the books, from the real life, from talking to God, and not to reading about some instructions, rituals, or liturgy, which again could be related to level of understanding. Most people are not sophisticated enough. I saw religion in real historic events since I was a child. My father was a very religious person, and he was a Jewish reverend, a cantor, and in a functioning as a rabbi, which means that I got also ideology, because Jews don't have theology, because Creator is invisible, and we know nothing about Creator except we can relate through creation to intentions of Creator. All other religions I know are using humans or animals or objects or planets or some kind of a stars as their gods. But all those things were created. To go to the source of who created life and how it was maintained and spread and so on, it goes far beyond 4.5 billion years of so-called age of the universe. And I'm deeply interested in those questions since I was a child. And I talked to something or somebody during those 200 days in a grave in darkness and silence. And I was explaining things which you don't find in books. And I don't know who was giving it to me and which language it was said. Which means that religion is a faith in something. And again, it depends on the level of understanding of the person, of education or indoctrination, or even forcing people into beliefs, or else they be punished if they say, burn that stake for being a heretic, which means that all those things I already experienced as a child. Naturally, it reflects in my writings and in my art and in my visual expression of things. And it also appeared in a song you will see about song where I cooperated with a songwriter, and she asked me, can you tell me what music excites you, what music you would makes you simply a melody which haunts you. And if you hear that song, you will understand that it applies not only to visual art, but also to sounds and music. And it will be on that PBS 26th in about a week and a half. April 26th of April.
I know we'll all tune in to that. I had a question that was coming through several times. People here, we are at Purdue, right? And there are people who are very curious about your inventions. You know, what did you make?
First of all, there were some ways of making glass products. They were the first big one was by using tiny ingredients in glass batch. It's a mixture of raw materials which are melted into glass. I added something less than 1% into it and was able, and this was my PhD thesis, I able to speed up melting by 40%, which means that you have a factory making, let's say, 100 tons of glass. The following day, or in few days, while that process is introduced, you are able to make 140 tons of glass per day by keeping the same people, same machines, same factories. You just need more materials to ship to which means that this was one of them. There were several products. Then there were patents about testing glass defects, and by looking at them through a machine, apparatus, which was in one of those slides, by looking at it in a cross section, find out what went wrong in a melting process or in a forming process, which means that for a technologist in a glass factory where 5 things can go right and 1,000 things can go wrong, and all 1,000 things disqualify selling the product, it was an incredible invention as the whole world practically bought that little. I can even show it to you. Anyway, which means that there are about 12.5 patents. First of all, let me explain something which I believe is missing here. Chemistry is made by combining different materials, usually in a liquid form. Is that dissolved and then combined to make a reaction? Glass is not. Glass reactions are not made that way. Its powders are mixed, about 10, 11 ingredients, and they are exposed to extremely high heat. That high heat is much higher for glass making than to make steel, which means that anything you look around yourself would melt or turn to ashes in temperatures glass is made. Glass was invented only once in the history of humankind, probably 5,000-6,000 years ago, maybe 4. To be a scientist in this field was very difficult because your instruments you usually use in scientific research or scientific analysis would all melt. How you study something as hot without destroying the equipment? Scientists have chosen not to go into glass science because it was dangerous. Fuel has to be used, which could explode and damage everything. I was trained by life. I survived 5 years, so 3 years on a death row. I was fearless, very strong. And I went to that field, and because scientists were in laboratories where it was probably air conditioning or very nice, safe environment, I did not mind to go into dangerous things which might explode and burn myself or damage buildings or furniture and so on. And that's why in that field, dangerous field, I have invented things which nobody else would even touch because it required courage, not only wisdom or some kind of an experience. And it gave me a tremendous advantage. And Czech glance had an incredible experience in glass making, much higher in Central Europe because it was sitting on a coal as a fuel. And in that area where I worked for 20 years, my school was absolutely outstanding. The school was the best school in Europe, next to some Munich University. Alchemist school was known in 1300s in Prague already. And this is where I studied 700 years later. And I absorbed absolutely everything.
Yeah, Český sklo.
I was lucky to get into a field which was not explored properly.
May I ask you, so I have a question coming up here that is a little changing gears a little bit, and it's about where people might be able to buy your art or see your art.
Uh, you know, the last year before COVID, 2019, I gave 26 lectures, and some of them in Europe, some of them in Canada, some of them in this country. Now I do it on Zoom, as we are doing it just this moment. And this week I had 5 actions, and tomorrow somebody from Newport is coming for her master's degree to take some pictures. I had no time to even finish my webpage and advertise and sell, but people coming here and they somehow online, information penetrated, people talk to each other, and people are coming and occasionally by art. But now I believe after this film, which is going to be broadcasting by PBS, I believe that interest would increase, and I would have to set aside time, stop talking to students so much, and start,
Selling art.
Selling art. Finally, turn it into some money or something. At least some more important people would have that art reserved. Maybe
Can you do both? Can you do both of these things?
Yeah, I managed to do both, like right hand side of the brain, left hand side of the brain. Then it's a front lobe and back lobe. It's a reptile brain, mammal brain. I use them all.
May I ask you one final wrap-up question here, which is, it's a question about current events, but more generally, saying, given the current events and what we see unfolding on the news, what about your experience do you want people to apply to their lives today?
The most important is to understand what's going on, because digital age is even more dangerous in spreading lies, information, or, each organization or group of people or nationality or country has own interest in surviving, in having advantage economically, some larger units politically, controlling neighbors, and superpowers compete for total control of the global economy or global political powers, and so on. Which means that to understand those relationships is number one, because then you can orient yourself. Because each group has its own agenda, and naturally all deformed information bent to serve their purpose, either money-making or political power, keeping power or acquire power, take it from somebody else and keep it. Which means that it is knowledge of the truth is the most important thing. Do not trust every message you receive because it's bent to serve something or somebody. And after you understood those interests of those groups, then you can orient yourself and do the best you can, because you cannot change too much, the best you can to serve the public, or to serve, make life, live a world better than you entered it. I would say, and that's all you can do, and you can do it in your small circle. And now with digital technology, we can. Now, two of us are talking to you through hundreds of miles, which is very interesting. But spreading lies can be done equally efficiently, which means that this would, I would say, when we had a session a few days ago, I said, don't get fooled as a slogan. Don't get misinformed, because it might lead you to slavery, or it might lead you to poverty, because you would give up something which is precious to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Knowledge, education, and little mistrust.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you both so much for joining us and for talking with us, and answering a good number of the questions which came in. I hope, I'm sorry to everyone that we weren't able to get to everything, but I tried to cluster these and ask questions that most of you were interested in. It means a great deal to all of us here, the students, educators, members of the community, and the planning committee, and to me, that we've been able to have this conversation. I will now turn the floor back over to Sarah Powley, but before I do, just allow me to extend special thanks to her for her tireless efforts to bring this event and many other meaningful events into being over the years. So thank you also to Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tibor. So many thanks for coming in on the chat, for your talk tonight, for telling us your story, and for sharing your art, and especially for helping us understand how the art helped you to express the inexpressible. And I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight and remind you of the presentation that Tibor will be making on the 26th of April at 8 p.m. on PBS, so check your local listings. This conference began 41 years ago through the work of Rabbi Gedalia Engel, who was the director of Hillel at Purdue at the time. Since that time, it has been an entirely volunteer effort to bring these programs to the community. And I want to thank our sponsors in the community and the sponsors at Purdue University and all of the individual donors who support us financially and make it possible to present this programming. I also want to thank all of the committee members. They're listed here. All of them have worked very hard. Some of us are on screen and some of us work behind the scenes. And we appreciate everything everyone does because everything they do matters. So thank you for attending the 41st Annual Greater Lafayette Holocaust Remembrance Conference. Have a good evening.